So hopefully you're here to learn about Backbone.js and Yii. My slides aren't keeping up. I'm Lauren OMeara. I'm visiting you from Tennessee. I've got my contact information up there if you want to talk to me. I'll show it again at the end of my talk. I've been developing software for a really long time. Currently, been consulting for about 4 years now with my partner James and Thomas. And in addition to our consulting, we've written an application called Doc Launcher, which is a web and mobile content management system. And James and I wrote a book about Yii, rapid development. Am I getting too ringy, you guys? So I want to do a little bit of a show of hands to see where you guys are coming from and what you want to hear about. How many people here have worked with Yii before? Okay, cool. Not a lot. It's a great framework, but it doesn't seem to have taken on very much in the States. Most of the people that we talk to and know work with Yii are in Europe or China or South America. But I'm not going to talk too much about Yii. Hopefully you're mostly here to learn about Backbone. How many of you have been working with Backbone? Okay, cool. And with Backbone, how many are making a single page application? Okay. And how many are just kind of using it to wrangle your JavaScript? Okay, cool. Those are both great things to do with Backbone. Please ask me questions as I go. I'm going to talk about our experience with Backbone and Yii, and I'm going to put it in the context that we worked in, and it may not fit your needs, so I'll do my best to answer your questions to meet your needs. In our context, this is a story about 2, maybe more technologies, 2 complementary, maybe not, technologies. We inherited this project. It wasn't our initial idea. We were brought on to assist the team that was already working. And they left in the middle of the project. So then we were left with this legacy, and we just had to go with it and make it work. And what we were actually doing was building a single page application. It's not something that, as you know, we wrote a book about PHP. It's not something that was our forte, so you can learn along with us. I'm going to give you an overview of the technology. I saw some hands not going up about Yii and Backbone, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about those. I'm going to go into some areas of concern about working with Backbone and doing a single page application and doing something that's very heavy in JavaScript. That's going to be the focus. And if we have time, I'll go into some specifics. I'll walk you through the structure of the project and show you kind of how things are laid out and how they go together. So for those of you who haven't messed around with single page applications, why would you want to do this? This is about trade-offs. So, you know, there are reasons why you might want to make a single page application, and there are reasons why you would want to avoid it like the plague. You might want to do it to make a very native experience for your users. If you put most of your functionality in JavaScript and you put it out in the browser, they get a very quick, responsive, native feeling experience. It feels like a mobile application. It feels like a desktop application. It doesn't feel like, you guys all know what it feels like, a web page where you're loading and you're waiting and you're loading. So as such, you can have rich interactions. And from a systems perspective, if you put your functionality out into the browser, in theory, you can reduce the load on your server. When you do that, now what you're asking your server to do is serve up content, serve up JavaScript, and serve up REST, just serve data, just hand data out there. So that can ease your network burden and ease your server burden. And another cool thing you can do is you can offer potentially an offline mode, which is great if you're doing a mobile focus. Now you can let your users download the whole site, interact with the whole site, and when they come online, push up their data. And you may have seen this with some of the Google apps, like Google Drive, I think, is really cool. You can create a spreadsheet offline. I love it for taking notes. So why on earth would you want to use Backbone.js? Well, you'd want to use it if you're making a single-page application. And the reasons for doing that is it gives you support for doing modular JavaScript. Instead of having a big JavaScript tangle, like I'm sure we've all seen, it helps you organize your code and compartmentalize your code, which makes it more maintainable. Backbone itself is not very opinionated. Clearly this is a problem because there are a million JavaScript frameworks out there. There are some that are very opinionated. Backbone is not one of them. If you like flexibility and you like to make more of your own decisions, then Backbone may be a good choice for you. If you want something with more structure and you want something with more of an opinion about how you should have a JavaScript framework, you should choose a different framework. And for us, not being massive JavaScript developers, because it's so small and it's so minimal, and you can just take what you want, you can kind of wade into it gradually. So it's easier for people to get started in. If you're transitioning from doing a lot of PHP, or you really focus on PHP and you need to get a handle on JavaScript, it's more accessible than some of the giant, bulky, opinionated frameworks. Why would you use Yii? And I'm glad that I can maybe share this information with you guys. In this scenario where you have a single-page application, your server side, your PHP side, does not have to do much. It's a REST server. That's all it is. And probably you guys have all made a REST server before. It's pretty easy to do. You would choose Yii in this case for quick scaffolding. It offers some really great utilities for scaffolding up your data and scaffolding up your site. It's pretty opinionated itself, so you can do some pretty fast development within its framework. Yii offers some really good security features, some best practices already baked in for handling cross-site forgery and that kind of thing. So you can worry less about security. The data access objects are great. It's been interesting to me at this conference. I've heard a lot of dislike for ORMs. I like using the ORM in Yii. This is part of why I chose Yii. I've been working with MySQL for like 15 years, and I know how to write a query and write a massive join very well. And Yii doesn't get in my way of doing that. I can do what I need to with MySQL, and Yii does a bunch of the boring stuff that I don't want to have to do. And it's lazy loaded, so it doesn't bulk up your server. It doesn't really slow things down. It's very much an optimized framework. Also, and this will come into play later, Yii provides very convenient URL management. And I'm not too familiar with how other frameworks do URL management, but the last survey that I did, Yii was my favorite. It's just a simple configuration file, and you just make a hash of where you want your URLs to go. Probably everybody's doing it that way. I can't think of a better way to do it. So this is us, our merry band of developers heading into this project not knowing what we were going to have to deal with. And this should be laid out better for you guys side by side. The upper left diagram is the old system, and the lower right diagram is the new system. So to give you some context, our client is a very old retail establishment. They're brick and mortar. They have a chain of stores, in fact. And a long time ago, they went online. They're not dumb. You have to sell things online to keep up. So they're maintaining their storefront, their brick and mortar stores, and their online presence. And in order to do that, they needed to coordinate their inventory management system for their brick and mortar with their inventory management for their web storefront. So they bought into a system a long time ago. They had their point of sale stuff, and they found a web service that would connect to their point of sale stuff. So great, they were happy. The web service uses WordPress. which is not really very performant. How many of you guys have managed or interacted with a WordPress site? We ran one for a really long time. They get really slow, and the store was encountering that. They were getting traffic, and they weren't handling their traffic well. So they wanted to modernize. And what they decided to do was keep most of the service that they're using. So they have to keep the inventory management. They kept part of the store management that they had in the past. And that continues to manage their checkout, their cart, their users. So this is great for us because that's all the security stuff. Our stuff is just the storefront. It just shows product and it communicates cart selections to the secure system. So we don't even have to really worry about security very much. So in this context, I'll tell you a little bit about our server side. To put up a server, you just use Yii web app, which is a command line to scaffold your project. Or my preference is to use CleverText boilerplate. They have a really excellent project framework available on GitHub. And it keeps me current. Every time I go to start a new project, I go get their boilerplate, and they've updated it with some of the latest tools and techniques, and it's a really great resource. So I drop in the boilerplate, and then Yii provides a scaffolding tool called G, and it's a web interface where you can just connect to your database and throw out your models, and based on your models, you can throw out your CRUD. We don't need the CRUD, we don't need web CRUD for REST server, so just scaffold up your model. And your Yii side needs to just serve a single homepage. It's a single page app, so you just need homepage HTML and drop in the JavaScript that's going to be your single page app, and then that's going to be everything else that the user does. Create your REST services on top of your models, and then add your routing. And the routing comes into play more later. I'll discuss where that became a concern. The client side is where it gets interesting, and hopefully this is what you came to see. So I'm going to kind of wade us into the client side. I'm going to make a pass here with 3 areas of concern that we had to deal with in doing a single page app. And then if there's time after that, I'll get into the terminal and I'll walk you through a project. And after this, I made a project using some free resources. I used the CleverText boilerplate, and I used the GitHub repo for a book on Backbone development with an example project, and just combine the two. So I'll make that available in my slides if you want to play around with it. To me, that's where I get the most learning, is where I'm actually messing with the code. So the first area of concern is the maintainability, and this is why we selected Backbone. But I told you we inherited this project and we had to deal with the consequences. Backbone wasn't cutting it, and I really should have named this talk Marionette more than anything. If you're using Backbone, it's great, but it doesn't scale. So I don't know if I can give you a good sense. If you're just manipulating the DOM with your JavaScript, then use jQuery. That's sufficient. Backbone builds off of that. Marionette builds off of Backbone. You don't need the bloat, and you don't need the extra stuff, and you don't need a giant JavaScript project. If you're scaling up a little bit and you have views and you have models, you have some REST, and your views are getting more interactive, scale it up to Backbone. That'll help you manage your code. That'll help you manage your models and your views. If you're getting bigger and you have more application logic, Backbone doesn't provide you with a controller. Marionette adds a little bit more structure, and it starts to add a concept of a controller. So that's kind of, as you scale up, that's a direction you can go. There are other options that build on top of Backbone. Like I mentioned, Chaplin and Thorax, and there are a few more. They're great, they're more opinionated, and they're heavier. It's the same kind of deal. Like maybe Backbone compared to Angular. maybe, and then Marionette compared to Thorax. Another thing that you get out of Marionette is a CQRS. And the basic idea is that you break your application into small pieces and you have a communication bus. And so for those of you who saw Laura's keynote, and she talked about the advances in PHP, and we've finally gotten to the concept of you read in one queue and you write in the other queue, that's what this gives you. So your JavaScript is, your modules are reading their events, and writing their events. And it just all goes onto a bus. And you can subscribe and you can write. And you don't have to do weird dependency injections to have your modules and models communicate with each other. Another very simple thing that Marionette adds is an application layer. If you are working with Backbone, for those of you who are, if you're not just very simply using components out of Backbone, if you're building an application, you're going to make an application object. So you might as well add a layer that gives you an application object. And that's one of the things that Marionette does. And this is kind of like the core object of your whole app. Everything extends and builds onto that. And we'll see it extended as we go. Because Marionette has an application, it's a giant module. You can break your application into submodules, and then Marionette provides a means for loading and unloading your modules. The benefit of this is you're freeing up your client memory. You can load things into memory when you're using a piece of it, and you can drop them out when you're not using a piece. So, for example, if your application is broken into a contact manager and a sales lead manager, then when you're managing contacts, you load up that module and drop everything else out of memory. When you switch to manage your sales leads, you load that up and drop everything else out of memory. I mentioned earlier, it adds the concept of controllers. And this is kind of an opinionated thing. There's different philosophies about how to organize your code and how to set up your framework. I like controllers because it's a sensible organization to the code for me. Clearly you have a model, that's your data. Clearly you have a view, that's your presentation. When your app gets to a certain size, you're going to have some logic. And Backbone's recommendation is they offer a router, and you put your logic in the router. But at some point, that gets very large. And to me, and feel free to disagree, it's a trade-off. At that point, you move it into a controller. And that's a sensible organization. But there are other ways of organizing what you've got. One thing that you don't get from Backbone that you do get from Marionette is the capability of nesting your views. So when we inherited our project, the original developers were using handlebars as a templating library. Are you guys familiar with using handlebars? It's really good. Do you like using it? You can put some view logic, and this again is a debatable point. You can put some logic into your views. It was necessary because we couldn't nest views. Once you can nest your views, for us, it was so simple. You're just displaying a product. You're just displaying a list of products. We're just a retail site. We're not doing anything super interesting, any kind of calculations in our views. So once we could nest our views, I dropped out handlebars, and I fell back to the default templating system, which is underscore. And this is good for us because it's one less thing to load. It's one less JavaScript library to carry around, and it simplifies the JavaScript that we're putting out. Another very basic thing that Marionette provides is named regions. In our original Backbone code, you have named divs all over the place. And if you want to rename things or reorganize your views or your templates, then you've got to go through and search through all of your code and rename all of those hashes everywhere, all those classes everywhere. If you name them at one place in your main application, you can refer to them everywhere, and this is just good organization. It's convenient. And probably anybody making a Backbone project sooner or later would make an object to manage that for them anyway. This is super cool. The collection views handle your events for you and render for you. So this just takes out a bunch of logic that you would have to write for yourself anyway. I don't even have an example because there's nothing to show you. If you tie a collection to a template, it's listening to events. When an item changes, the collection updates. That's great. And this is really key. This goes back to the event bus that I was talking about. Marionette provides a single event bus. You just register your listener and then trigger your events. And all of your modules all over the place. Everybody can listen all over the place to an event. Everybody can update. Everybody can register what they want, what events they want to deal with. It's a super convenient way, and it reduces your code so much. Because if you think about having to pass objects and link them into your JavaScript objects in order to deal with communication, that gets really messy. Wow, I really took longer on this than I did. I'm going to speed through the rest. A huge area of concern with speed, and you guys are web developers, so you know about this. You need your app to be responsive. And a huge surprise to us was you download the home page, you download this giant bloat of JavaScript, and your customers walk away before it's even done loading because the JavaScript is so huge and bloated. So we quickly had to find a solution to manage that, and the major part of the solution was using require.js. Oh, good, okay. I was like, wow, time just flies. Okay, good. So require.js manages your dependencies. That's an aside from the speed. That's great. So that you're not loading something and trying to do something when a library that depends on isn't there. That's a wholly separate benefit from the speed benefits that you get from require. The speed benefits are that you can, when you define your dependencies, require will load the dependencies as you need them. You can set in your JavaScript before you do a block of code a requirement on a library. So if you put some time into structuring your code and think about what you need where, you can really reduce the load time and just pull in libraries as you need it. So for an example, if you have a big calculation library and you only use it when you want to produce a sales report, then you don't need to load that on your page load. You can wait until the user goes to view a report, which they may never do. Maybe they're a user that never cares about reports. When they go to view a report, then they load the library, then they view the report. And it ensures that it's there so that you don't get a JavaScript error. The size part comes in because require.js provides an optimizer. And what the optimizer does is it scans through your whole requirement tree and it compresses and minifies and puts all of your requirements into a single file. You can specify how you want to organize that, so maybe all of your main stuff gets loaded initially, and like I said, you get the benefit of additional libraries loaded as you need them. But hopefully you guys are already familiar with this. The biggest bloat of network communication is the individual request. So if your libraries are, if you got 10 different libraries that you need for JavaScript and you're having to request this one and then that one and then this one and then that one, you've got 10 instances of overhead of making that request. If you can combine it into one file and make one file, yes, you're downloading the same data, but you're not making 10 requests, you're making one. And this sped up our download time. It was 6 seconds, I'm embarrassed to say, initially. And now on a bad day, it's 2 seconds. On a good day, it's 1. It's not great. We still are trying to improve our performance, but you can't run a store with a 6-second load time. We also tried a million different approaches to caching. And I cannot do as good a job as H. Hatfield did in his talk, so I'm gonna, for anybody that missed his talk, and there weren't that many people there, it's kind of a shame. If you're interested in performance and you want to know about caching, he did a great talk and covered very knowledgeably a bunch of different strategies. We tried most of them, and he had some great suggestions for us too, walking out of there. So he is awesome. Opcode caching, hopefully you know about to improve your PHP performance. It wasn't such a big deal for us, but to speed up our REST responses, might as well. We were making inventory queries, and some of them don't change very frequently. So inventory gets loaded once a week, maybe. And so we have a new inventory view. We can cache that for a week. Sales change about once a week. We can cache that for a week. We tried doing some page caching with Varnish. That didn't go so great, and I need to go back and spend some time on that. That can be really good if you have a page that doesn't change very frequently. And I think that it's suited to a single page app. Is anybody here familiar with Varnish? Have you used that for your page caching? Okay, I'm not going to go into it now. Watch H's talk. Varnish is a proxy, reverse proxy. It sits in front of your web server, and you can, if you have so in our case, a single page app, you're loading a home page. The content of the home page doesn't change. It changes because of the JavaScript. So caching that page is kind of a no-brainer. It should be up in memory and ready to spit out for every web request. That could be a big savings. We have not mastered it yet. So check back in with me on that. I should be able to tell you more. If you're doing anything with JavaScript, then you know that you should be using HTML caches. You should be using the browser cache for your resources. And neophytes that we did not initially understand cache busting. Has anybody had that problem where you update your JavaScript library and then you have to tell everybody that's testing your code that they need to reload, they need to clear their cache, and they need to reload? Yeah. So much, I don't even want to think. It makes me sick to think about the time wasted on that. With Require, you can set up a cache bust. For development, just put a timestamp on it and the cache is busted. Every time the file is, it doesn't matter, the file doesn't have to change. It's going to be loaded every time. For production, you'll see it on Stack Overflow. Believe me, I looked. You can't force your users to clear their cache. So if you don't have a way of forcing your new resource out there, your users are going to be looking at your old JavaScript or your old image or whatever until the cache clears. So we version it. You tie a version, and when you deploy, you rev your version, and the cache will be busted for the next time they visit the site. A huge, huge, huge thing for us is SEO. We're talking about a retail scenario. This may not be important for your scenario, but for us, the store was in existence. They had a site. They had URLs that their customers had presumably bookmarked, and more importantly, they had URLs that web crawlers had cataloged. So we couldn't just throw up a new URL scheme. And if anybody's familiar with Twitter's upgrade to a single page app, the initial round of single page apps used hash changes. So you can see my example URLs. Your hash change, when you make an action in your app, it updates the URL, but it adds a hash mark. It adds a URL fragment. And that's not the existing URL for the SEO. That's different, and it's weird. So and this is what we did at first, and we busted our site's ratings in Google Analytics for a minute. So we had to change from using the hash change to using a push state. Push state isn't supported in all browsers, but what it does, instead of tacking on a URL fragment, it updates the URL in the familiar way with slashes. Additionally, when you turn on history, it manages the history of your browser. So when you're pushing your site and you're changing the URL based on user actions, the forward and the back button are going to work. So when your user expects, oh, I looked at this product, I looked at this product, I looked at this product, now I want to go back to the first one, they can hit the back button and get there. And the URL will match, and they can bookmark it. So this is one part of the solution. You have to turn on history management, and we had to configure it to use the push state and to not use the hash change. And Backbone handles this, just for those of you who are concerned about push state. It's an HTML5 feature. It's not supported in all browsers. For the browsers that don't have it, Backbone detects it, and it falls back to a full server request. So typically in your single page app, when you make an action, the JavaScript handles it. With the fallback, it goes all the way back to the server and reloads the page and reloads the URL. It slows it down for the older browsers that don't support push state, but it gives you a graceful, proper URL handling, and we were happy with that. I think I referred to this code earlier. It should look familiar to you. This is the other part of handling the URLs. You have to turn off the default. When the user clicks on a button or a link, you have to catch it and prevent default. And then you have to send it to the history with navigate. So you have to tell it what URL you want it to see. And then you can catch it and do whatever you want to do from there. Hit send to your trigger, take whatever action you want. I mentioned at the beginning that the Yii routing was key. If you are supporting these URL updates and you're the client, you're hopping around the site, you go into different products, you bookmark a product, when you go back to the site, your server has to catch that URL. This probably seems like a no-brainer, but on your web server, you have to configure that that URL exists and what to do with it. If you don't, your push state falls apart entirely. So it's a subtle point, but it can be overlooked disastrously. Yii routing was really helpful here because what we've got is it's configured, and I wish it was displaying it neatly formatted like I had it. But you've got your list of your REST actions, and then finally you've got a catch-all. Any other URL that comes in is just going to go to the index, and that's the proper thing. Then Backbone is going to take over. The Backbone routing is going to kick in. It's going to find the route, it's going to find the proper trigger, and it's going to load up the state that goes with that URL. So those are the major hiccups that we encountered, and hopefully that will impart some useful knowledge for you for any projects that you're doing with JavaScript. These are some things that I look forward to digging into in the future. I don't think we handle progressive enhancement great. Like I said, we gave some thought to handling push state and to falling back for IE. I mean, we're a retail site, so we want to have as much reach as we can. We want to hit every browser that we possibly can. And right now, if you don't have JavaScript enabled, you're not going to see anything, and that's not good. So we need to give some thought about how to deal with that. And at the moment, I can't think of anything except for to deal with that with Yii. I'll stay tuned. Maybe I'll update these slides. They will be available online. It would be cool to fully support offline mode. Our store doesn't currently do that, but it would be nice for mobile shopping to be able to download the store and download an inventory and shop around while you're on the train or whatever, and then make your purchase when you get back to the network. And one thing that we haven't done to optimize network communication is use WebSockets, which you can do with Backbone. We just haven't given any effort into implementing that. So how are we looking for time? We're good? I'll pop open a terminal and walk you through a project real quick, and if I can get it up on the screen. There we go. Like I said, I'll make this project available to you so that you can look at it here, but that only does so much. Then you can play around with it on your own. Okay. Where am I? All right, so this is the boilerplate from CleverTech, and it's more than you really need for this example, but if you're doing an enterprise project, a lot of times you'll have a front end and you'll have a back end. You'll have a customer-facing piece and you'll have an admin piece, and they just put that into their boilerplate. So there's a whole section called back end and there's a whole section called front end, and you can separate them, and then they have a common library so that if you have common actions and controllers and models, you can put them all there and share them between the two. And this has been a great structure that's worked really well for us. You can see that they're using Composer. If you haven't worked with Composer, it's freaking great for managing your dependencies for PHP. It's really convenient. And a boilerplate project from CleverTech is a great way to step into it and see how it's set up. It's a great way to experiment. So the only thing that we really care about for my example is the front end. And this is a Yii site organization. You see your models and views and controllers. And you also see the wah directory. That is the publicly accessible directory. So, my models are going to have my database stuff. My controllers are going to have my REST management. I'm not going to spend any time on that. My configuration looks like the configuration that I showed you. Oh, I didn't put it in there yet. You saw it. I've got my URLs configured so that they go to REST, and then they go to the fall through to the home page, and that's it. I have one view. It's the home page. And I have one layout. That's the main layout. And all it does is loads in my required JS, which loads in my application, which loads in everything else. And I set up my DOM a little bit. I set up the regions that I'm going to manipulate with my JavaScript. I did a little bit, I didn't mention this earlier. Okay. For web crawlers, if you have JavaScript content, if you have content that's created by JavaScript, they are mostly not going to see it. So for getting into the search engines, you need to put a little bit of a title and a little bit of a meta tag description into every URL that you support. So we did this with Yii. So we catch it, we process it, we recognize what it is, and we use PHP to inject it into the landing page. So web crawlers will actually see what goes with the URL they're looking at, even though the JavaScript hasn't kicked in and loaded in the DOM and put in all the content. That's it. And then where the action is in the publicly accessible directory. It's got a little bit of CSS, got some images, and where things are happening is in the JavaScript. And this is not something that I put together. This is from a book about structuring Backbone applications with Marionette. It's a great book, and I really recommend it. It's like $25, and I included in a slide at the end. But the repository is freely available. And the entry point is your require configuration. You set up the libraries, the paths to the libraries that you're going to use. You define the dependencies between those libraries, because even your libraries are dependent on each other, and you don't want, for example, Backbone to load when jQuery hasn't loaded yet. And then you kick off your application, and that's it. So looking at how an application is structured, you set up your regions, you instantiate the marionette application, and set up your navigation, like we already talked about. And that's the backbone of your application. From there on, you've just got your modules that are your controllers and your views listening. And all of those are your sub-applications here. Contacts is the meatiest one. You set up your submodule, the main component, and do a little bit of initialization. Set up your dependencies and your handlers, and now your bus is active and you're listening for events on your DOM and you're ready to go. I don't know if I can get too much deeper into it from there. I've got it organized by, the book organized it by activity within your application. So you've got edit, new. There's no activity for delete because delete is just a REST query, a call to REST. Each activity has a controller and a view and a template if you need one. There's my template. But I'll, like I said, I'll make this available so that you can mess around with it some more yourself. Okay, cool. To give you a little bit more direction from there, I tried to put together a little bit of an idea of how you would approach putting together a marionette application. I didn't build one from scratch. What I had was an iteration. Like I said, what we were doing was iterative, so I tried to think about how I do it from scratch. It's organized into the application and the sub-areas, so it's helpful if you can kind of think about the sub-areas of your application and think about where your data is, set up your models and your collections, create your views, make sure to put in the routes that you need, think about what routes you need, and then as you need them, add your controllers. And once you've got that done and working, then put everything into require, start worrying about speed and optimizing on top of that. I put together a whole bunch of resources for you guys that I've used that have been helpful to me. The Twitter single-page app experience was particularly interesting to me, what they went through going to a single-page app, and they ultimately pulled back. The reasons why they pulled back, I think it's interesting to hear about people's use cases and what works for them and what doesn't. I put up a couple of the books that I used, and a link to the Backbone debugger. If you're going to be working on a project, there is a Backbone debugger for Chrome that will load in your different components. You can see your models and views in there, and that's super helpful. A little bit about Yii, and for another perspective, I mean, I have to say, single-page apps aren't right for everything. So Raka is another philosophy of doing web development, and I'm kind of turning my attention to that now because I'm not entirely convinced that a single-page app is the way to go for a retail server. So I'd love to continue the conversation and let you guys know where things go from here, answer any questions if you're working on a similar project. That is my contact information. I'll answer any questions that you have now, and I appreciate any feedback that you'd like to share on the Joined In page. Does anybody have a question for me? Yes, you saw maybe a little bit of that in my structure. Yeah, we're using the libraries for asset management and having it minify the require file further. It doesn't do that much on top of what require already does. Yeah. Yeah. Also, because you know about Yii, we have a switch in our configuration so that we flip between dev and production. We use the optimized require file in production, and we use the non-optimized require configuration file in dev so that we can debug our JavaScript. And that's another nice, I don't think I explicitly said it, but you know, it's just a REST server on the server side. You can do whatever you want with that. You can use whatever language you want for that. You can write a REST server in just about anything. I tried to give a few reasons why, a few examples of how Yii's been helpful with that. Who are the people that work with Yii currently? Anybody want a Yii book? Is anybody that doesn't work with Yii interested in wanting a Yii book? All right. Will you walk them around? Okay. We'll arbitrarily pick someone that has their hand up.
I'm just choosing whoever's closest.
Email me. I might have a PDF.
What'd you say, Lauren?
Nothing.
If someone wants to give her the contact, whatever she said.
Are there any other questions? Any experiences anybody wants to share about any of this technology? Okay, thank you very much for coming, you guys.